When you talk about disruption and innovation, one of the things that is sort of clear about Nigeria is this morning I came and people are doing selfies and we're all carrying around these smartphones in our pockets. But that technology, just a few years ago, it's unheard of that we could have a device like this in our pocket. You probably have seen the news about the Apple iPhone 10 launch, the iPhone X, an amazing piece of equipment. But if you take one of the average smartphones that you guys have in your pocket today, maybe a Samsung Galaxy S6 or maybe an earlier iPhone, a HTC or something like this. If you were to take one of these devices and you had a time machine and you went back to 1990, your smartphone that is in your pocket would be representative of a supercomputer that back in 1990 was worth 30 or 40 million dollars. And you carry that around in your pocket today. That's just 30 years ago. Incredible stuff. What do we do with our supercomputers that we have in our pockets? Well, we take selfies and update our Facebook status, of course, right? And WhatsApp. So this technology, as it's impacted our life, it's made some interesting changes. We really have this love of technology that as these new devices come out, we're watching the Apple keynote, we're watching this, but people camp out to get the new iPhones and technologies like that these days. It's pretty crazy. But there's two sides of this. There's the disruptive side of this, which affects employment and affects industries. And there's the personal side of this, particularly the consumption of these technologies. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the personal aspects of how technology is going to change our life over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I want to talk about the disruption to industries as well. Particularly, I'm going to dive into the banking sector. So let's talk about the yin and yang a little bit. When you go back 200 years ago, the most disruptive technology wasn't smartphones, obviously. It was the steam engine. And in 1812, in Britain, the textiles industry was the largest industry. It employed the most people in Britain. The second largest industry was farming and agriculture. In the US, agriculture was the primary employment. But when the steam machine came along, it took people that had trained for 4 or 5 years to learn how to use these weaving looms in the textiles factories and replace them with a child who could operate a steam machine. And these textile workers were upset. They used to riot and they formed these militia groups and they would come and they would smash up the steam machines in these factories because their jobs were at risk. We came to call these people Luddites. I don't know if you've heard that term before. But that was because their leader, the leader of this group was known as King Ludd or General Ludd. Ned Ludd, his name was. We don't know if he's actually a real person or is fictitious, but the Luddites became known for their dislike of technology. But it wasn't that they didn't like technology per se, it's just they didn't like technology that was taking their jobs. And 200 years later, we see the same thing today with the smartphone. These are taxi drivers protesting Uber in France, where they would stop the Uber drivers in their car, they would pull them out of the car and they would set the car on fire because Uber was taking their jobs. So while there's this love of technology with people camping outside of an Apple store to get a new iPhone, we also see that technology is very disruptive. It does change the way we work and live. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it has negative effects. We can actually track this if we look at this on a graph. This is the change in employment in agriculture in the United States as a result of the tractor, the combustion engine. You can see the red line is the number of people working on farms from the early 1900s through to the 1960s, 1970s. In 1850, 70% of the US labor force was working on a farm. Today it's 1.6%. That's how technology's changed this industry. But if you are looking at this graph, some of you will be saying, but what happened to all those people that lost their job on the farms? Where did they go? Well, if you were in the United States, you might have gone into manufacturing. Like the Model T Ford production line at the start of the 20th century created massive job opportunities in the United States. Some economists say it was responsible for the creation of the middle class in the United States. So the jobs moved out of farming and agriculture into manufacturing. But in the 1960s and 1970s, we started to automate these capabilities. We didn't need people in the manufacturing sector anymore because we started to automate it. Robots, computers that we built into these processes changed the way this worked. But the big disruptive forces coming down the pipeline are all related to forms of technology. So the most obvious disruption that we're talking about today in terms of what's going to happen over the next 20 years is the introduction of artificial intelligence. Now, I'll talk about robotics as a subset of this because every robot that can automate itself or can decide upon an action by itself has some sort of machine intelligence capability. Now, when we talk about AI, you've probably heard about AI through science fiction. Depiction of these robots that look like humans and things like that. I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan. I don't know if there's any Star Trek fans out there, but there was Data, who was an android on Star Trek. He was a form of artificial intelligence. So when you look at AI, we tend to break it into developmental stages. Right now today, we don't have talking robots that could be mistaken for a human. That's what we call artificial general intelligence, when a robot can mimic a human. There's an actual test for this, which Alan Turing came up with, called the Turing test. And that is the test you use to determine if a computer can mimic or is as intelligent as a human. But before we get to artificial general intelligence, right now today, we have intelligent machines, machine intelligence. Machines that can learn to do one job that a human can do. Now, right now, there's a lot of talk about, in the West, about autonomous driving, self-driving cars. This is a form of AI or robotics. A self-driving car that drives itself is essentially a robot that you can sit inside. But today, the most common form of household robot that we see is a vacuum cleaner. Right? A machine intelligent vacuum cleaner. About 30% of vacuum cleaners sold in the world today are robots. So we have machine intelligence. These are machines today that can mimic what a human does, replicating one type of task. Then we have artificial general intelligence, when a machine can trick us into thinking it's intelligent or same intelligence as a human. And then later, maybe probably around 2045, 2050, we think we'll get to a point where we have strong AI. These are machines that are smarter than humans. Now, of course, the big question is, when we have machines that are smarter than us, what are they going to do with us as humans? Right? Well, we'll get to that, right? Okay, so then the next major disruptive theme is embedded technology experiences. Just like when I came in today and people are taking their phones and doing selfies and things like this, this is how technology has changed our world already. But in the future, technology is going to be so cheap and so pervasive that it's going to be integrated in every part of our life. In 20 years' time, instead of having screens like this, most walls in convention centers will just have screens built into them because the screen technology will be so cheap. You might have a wristwatch that you wear, a bracelet, that looks like a smartwatch. But then you unfold the bracelet, you take it off your wrist, and you can use it as a smartphone. You unfold it again, and you can use it as a tablet. Within a few years, we'll be able to have technology like this based on what we're seeing today. But some of the biggest disruptive technologies we're just seeing emerge today is the use of two major new technological developments. One is integrating AI into our world through voice interfaces. So this is technologies like Amazon Alexa, Amazon Echo. I'm going to demonstrate that for you later. Or in the future, in about 10 years' time, we'll be wearing smart glasses. So those of you that have glasses on today, right, like me, we may be at a bit of an advantage because we're used to wearing glasses already. But these glasses will present you with data in your head-up display. You'll be able to see information presented just in your field of view. By 2027, we expect that smart glasses will be at the stage of development of where the iPhone was around 2010. So a major new disruptive technology. But think about this, when you can talk to your computer, when you don't need a keyboard, when you don't need a screen because you can just see it in your head-up display with a set of glasses, this really does change the way technology's been built into our life because your computer's listening to you all the time. It can respond to you based on your behavior. So this technology becomes very personalized. But, I got on a plane, I came from New York, I came via London, and these days it's very common for people to use online ticketing systems to book a flight to go somewhere. So you just get online, you get onto the airline website, and you pick where you want to go to and from, the dates, you pick the class of travel. But in the future, we won't use a web page for doing that. In the future, we'll just say, hey Siri, can you book me a flight to Lagos, Nigeria next Friday? And that's how we'll do it in the future. Now, this might sound like science fiction, but the base technology for doing this, we already have today. So the world will be infused with technology. And some of this technology will become quite personalized in that it's going to be integrated into our daily life from a monitoring and a health perspective. So one of the big technology disruptions in healthcare is the use of diagnosis chips, labs on a chip, where you can get just a drop of blood and analyze for a whole set of diseases. Maybe we'll have this technology in our home. But gene editing is the big technology. So we've been able to sequence our DNA for a few decades now. The first human genome project took 10 years and billions of dollars of development to sequence the first human genome. Today we can do a single pass for about 6,000 base pairs for about $99 to sequence your genome. But the big trick is over the next 15, 20 years, we'll be able to edit your DNA. So if you have a genetic tendency towards cardiac disease, or certain cancers, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cystic fibrosis, all of these diseases are genetic conditions. We'll just be able to edit those diseases out of your DNA like a software bug. You won't need medicine. You just get gene therapy and the disease will be gone. Pretty crazy stuff. So you put all of these things together and what we get is the emergence of smart economies. Think about it this way. In the 1850s and 1860s, the emergence of the railway and the telegraph were basically what boosted the economies of Europe and the United States and created enormous wealth and enormous economic activity. So the infrastructure we need to be competitive in the future is things like artificial intelligence, telecommunications, sensors that can collect all of this data and so forth. Now, there's one advantage Nigeria has in this sense, is that when you're in, say, the United States, if you want to introduce new technologies, like solar technology, for example, you have to convince everyone to move off the old system. But in Nigeria, there's this greenfield opportunity to introduce these new technologies and get adoption very, very quickly, which we don't have in the United States. In fact, if you're watching the US elections, where they elected Trump, don't ask me how that happened, by the way, but when they elected Trump, he was saying, we're going to create all these coal jobs. We're going to bring back big coal jobs. But here's the thing. If the US gets stuck on coal, because of the investment that's happening in solar technologies around the world today, In China and India, for example, they've already stopped all coal production, all new coal plants from being constructed. They're investing in solar because the cost of solar energy right now is reducing by half every 2 years. So in 10 years, that means the US will be paying 10 times what China is paying for electricity if they stay with coal. Can the US compete as an economy in the future based on coal? No way. It's not possible. So while we talk about Trump, you know, anywhere I go, anywhere in the world, I put up Trump's picture and people laugh, right? So that says something, I guess, about the US democratic process. But this was him speaking before the US election, and this is what he said about Apple Computer. He was going to get Apple to bring their jobs back to the United States. This is how he talked about it.
We're going to get Apple to start building their damn computers and things in this country instead of in other countries.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trump, President Trump. Okay, now, he says he's going to get Apple to bring their factories back to the United States and make computers there. Now, the reason he said this is he said, essentially saying this is going to create a ton of jobs in America because I'm going to force Apple to move out of China and come back to the United States. You may have heard of a company called Foxconn. They manufacture most of the Apple devices we use today, particularly the iPhones, in China. But here's probably what you don't know. Today, Foxconn is installing tons of robotic equipment on the manufacturing line. They're replacing 6,000 humans per month with robots. 6,000 humans per month with robots. Now think about this. If Trump did force Apple to build their damn computers and things in the United States, would Apple come to the United States and build factories that put humans on the factory floor, or would they use robots? The answer is clear. So you're going to see the emergence of these smart factories, and this is how economies will have to differentiate. Manufacturing is no longer going to be dominated by a human workforce. It's going to be dominated by automation. But if you've got a manufacturing industry that needs to be completely retooled, it's going to take you quite some time. Same for something like solar energy. You know, we expect, just in solar energy, that globally, by 2030, about 50 million people will be employed in retooling the world from using these wooden poles with electricity wires on them to distributed systems based on solar energy. So this is going to be a massive job creator. Now, Trump has talked about the fact that they've produced 50,000 new jobs in coal since he became president. That's pretty good. What he doesn't say is that there's been 1.3 million jobs created in solar during the same period. So we know where this is going. Smart infrastructure, smart factories, smart economies, smart businesses in that scene. Now, when you look at very specific parts of industries, you see that automation is going to have, again, a devastating effect on employment. There's 2 million transcontinental truck drivers in the United States alone. Imagine all of those drivers being replaced by a robot that can drive a truck. Now, you might be in Lagos traffic sitting there thinking, there's no way a robot's going to be able to handle traffic in Lagos, right? Where I'm from, in Australia, they have a problem in that robotic cars with the LiDAR detectors, they don't know how to handle kangaroos, right, as they bounce across the road. So we have to work that out before the cars are safe. But these automation is going to change the way we work and the way we have employment. Now, the sensors that we're creating aren't just sensors that are going to make a self-driving car safe, but these sensors we may use that have become very personal. You might wear, for example, a smart watch on your wrist, and that smart watch will be able to track your heart rate. Now, when we apply artificial intelligence to that heart rate, we're already having algorithms that will be able to predict that you're going to have a heart attack. Pretty crazy stuff. So, you know, my friend John here, John, maybe he's wearing a smartwatch. You got a smartwatch on today, John? Yeah? Oh, he's got a Fitbit band on. Well, that can measure your heart rate, right? So he's got one of these bands on. It can measure his heart rate. Now, if we were able to predict that John's going to have a heart attack in about 3 months, I'm really sorry about that, John. But if we could predict that, what do? Well, the first thing we do is we say, you better go see your doctor, okay? We get an alert. We say, go to see a doctor. But what if we can predict that John's going to have a heart attack in 2 years' time? Well, then instead of sending him to the doctor, we send him to a nutritionist. Or we say, you got to go to the gym more, John, right? So this data is going to change the way we think about healthcare significantly. This is another type of sensor you might have in the future. This is an ingestible. This is a computer you swallow. Now you can see the tablet or the pill there has a little dot on it, and that is a chip. Now, if you drive a car, if you own a car, inside the car is a battery that powers the vehicle. Now that battery has inside, if you open up, has battery acid inside it. So scientists work out that the acid in your stomach could act as a battery, or as a power source. So you swallow this chip, it hits your stomach acid, and the stomach acid powers this device, which sends data to your smartphone from this little chip inside your stomach. This is not science fiction. This is already existing. It's approved by the FDA. In fact, we can get you to swallow cameras and all sorts of things now to do analysis on this. But imagine having this technology integrated into our life in the future, where we can have these computer devices monitoring our healthcare. So instead of you waiting till you feel a bit sick to go to the doctor, this technology will tell you you're sick before you even know it. Pretty incredible changes that we're seeing. So some humans are going to augment themselves in much more dramatic ways. This is Dr. Hugh Herr. He's a double amputee, and you can see he's wearing robot prosthesis, robot prosthetic legs. And he's a mountain climber, and he says that today he's able to climb mountains better than when he had his natural legs before he had his accident and had them removed. His friends joke that if they want to keep up with him on mountain climbing, they're going to have to get amputations as well, right? But we're going to have soon the technology to have robotic arms and robotic legs that not only duplicate the functionality of your natural human limbs, but that could outperform human natural limbs. So how many people are going to choose to get robotic enhancements to their body in 20 or 30 years' time? Well, we don't know. Now, you're probably not going to get robot legs, but what you may do is you may wear smart glasses. Now, this is where we're at with smart glasses today. These are augmented reality glasses, and if you know anything about the iPhone 10, you would have seen that augmented reality was a big part of the new technologies that Apple's introducing. They use a facial sensor in your new camera. It doesn't use a camera, rather. It uses a 3D sensor, which will count 30,000 dots on your face using infrared technology. So these sensors can also measure what's happening in your room. And you can take a photograph or video processing through the camera and see what's in a room, and you can use an IKEA app to actually put IKEA furniture and see what it will look like inside the room. But imagine a surgeon with augmented reality glasses operating on a patient and being able to see a 3D view of that patient's body. Imagine running or cycling and being able to see your heart rate and the number of miles you're doing in your head-up display in your glasses. There's so many different applications of this information we could have in the head-up display. So we will be augmenting our vision. But the biggest change still comes back to artificial intelligence. And so when you see science fiction, this is what science fiction thinks robots look like. This is Ava from Ex Machina. But the reality is somewhat different today. The reality is this is the robots we've actually got today, robot vacuum cleaners. And they can't make you a cup of coffee, they can't drive your car, but they can vacuum the floor pretty well. So this is this first stage of technology we're talking about. But robots are becoming increasingly a part of our life. By 2035, there are going to be more robots on the planet than humans. Now, when you walked in to the auditorium today, you may have seen a drone flying overhead. But we are now automating those drones to work by themselves. You'll be able to have a drone in the future, a personal drone if you want. You can throw it up in the air and it'll be able to take selfies following you all the time, right? You know? But you think about this, with more robots on the planet than humans, what are they going to be doing? Well, they're going to be delivering goods and services. We're going to have robots that are driving cars, robot chefs that can make you meals and things like this in restaurants. So the only thing I would say is that if you understand that there's going to be more robots than humans on the planet by 2035, be kind to robots. You never know what's going to happen in the future, okay? So when we want to extrapolate how this all sort of takes place, I want to focus then on how this might affect various industries. I'm going to talk about banking as the start of that. Now, I'm working on a new book right now called Bank 4.0. And to understand what Bank 4.0 is, I really have to explain what Bank 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 is. So let's start with that, okay? So Bank 1.0 really goes back to the traditional form of banking. Now, the oldest bank in the world today, Monte dei Paschi di Siena, is in Italy, Siena, Italy, and it's about 750 years old. Now, when you walk into this bank, they have preserved the old bank branch from 700 years ago. Now, when you walk in, there's some tables and chairs and so forth, but on the side of the building is these stands, podium if you like, with some metal grating where you could go and stand and talk to the banker. And the metal is not, it's not a window, it's like this metal frame with a small window in it that you could talk to the banker. In 700 years, we haven't even changed the way tellers are used in banking, right? So today we replace it with bulletproof glass, but it's still the same mechanism. So in 700 years, when we think about banking, not a lot changed. You know, even the word banking comes from the Italian formation of banking. You know, the word banco in Italian essentially was a bench that they had in the marketplace. And the bankers would come and sit in the marketplace, sit on this bench, and trade and help people with financing and so forth. Currency exchange, things like this. But when the banker got in trouble, they would smash the bench so he could not work in the marketplace again. So this Italian word for this is rupture, to break apart. So if you put it together, you get banco rupture, bankrupt, right? This is where the word came from. Even mortgage. You know, the mortgage was developed by a Briton, Thomas Littleton, in the 12th century. I don't know why I looked at John then, but anyway, in the 12th century. And he came up with this mortgage, but it was called vadium mortem, was the Latin name for the mortgage product that they came to help people own their home. The French translated this as gage mort, right? The pledge of the dead. I don't know why we call that. But gage mort, you swap it around, mort gage, mortgage. Right? So even the names we use. On the Silk Road, when they used to travel, the Arabians used to travel on the Silk Road to China, they had a bill of exchange. They called it sak. This is a Persian word for it. We translate that today as check. So thousands of years later, we still use the same language. Banking hasn't changed that much in hundreds of years. But the first major technological change in banking was the introduction of the mainframe. So the mainframe computer, what it did is it dramatically changed processing inside the bank. If you remember banking prior to computers, what would happen is you'd go to the bank and you'd fill out a index card for your bank account. This is how you open a bank account. You put your name, your address, and then what would happen is when you go in to withdraw cash, they would cross out the old balance and write in the new balance. And they do the same on the bank ledger. So in about the 1960s, we started automating this technology using computers, mainframes. The first bank mainframe in 1953, built by MIT for Bank of America, was called IRMA, Electronic Recording Machine for Accounting. I think that's where we get acronyms too in the banking industry, from the computer guys, right? But here's what's interesting. IRMA couldn't sort customer records by name because it wasn't that complex, the computer back then. So every customer had to be given a unique number to identify themselves. And this is why we have bank account numbers today. We didn't have them before computers came along. Okay? Now, when we think about Bank 1.0, the next era of technology disruption in banking, Bank 2.0, was sort of the era of self-service banking. Now, in 1995, we started to see the first internet banks arise, but really just before that, it wasn't, long before that, 1980s or so, that ATMs became popular, automated teller machines. Now, Paul Volcker, the Fed chairman in 2009, when he was talking at the hearings on the financial crisis, when the Wall Street guys talked about financial innovation, he said, no, it's not financial innovation. The only financial innovation, or the only innovation we've had in financial services the last 20 years has been the ATM machine. Now, you might look at this and you say, well, what about mobile banking and internet banking? But see, they aren't bank innovations. The internet's not a banking innovation. The mobile phone is not a banking innovation. There's technology that we've adopted, but it's not being created by banks. So it's really point-of-sale networks and ATM machines. These are true bank innovations. What they did is they pushed us outside of the branch to do our banking. We didn't need to do banking in the branch anymore. We didn't need to see a human to get cash out at a bank branch. We could do it on a machine. We could check our balance and so forth on our own internet device at night. But then mobile came along. In 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the smartphone, and it changed the world. And what that did is it further extended banks' capabilities. So we didn't need to go to the bank now for a whole range of things. We could do them just on our phone. Now, this shift meant that we're moving away from the bank as a place to now banking embedded in your life. And Bank 4.0 extends upon that. And it's really where we start creating payment and banking experiences embedded into our world. This is Mark Zuckerberg talking about augmented reality smart glasses and how this is going to change the world. Facebook has already invested $10 billion in augmented or mixed reality technology to go into smart glasses, and Apple is doing similar. So we know that this is the future of computing, this sort of devices. So how is it going to work in this world? Well, to illustrate this problem of evolution or disruptive innovation, as we talked about, I wanted to give you an example of rocket science. Now, it's not that banking's rocket science, it's not, but we can learn something from these core technologies. So the first major technology in rocketry was this. It was the V2 rocket. Now, this was at the end of the Second World War that this rocket was built, and it was the first weapon of mass destruction. It was an intercontinental ballistic missile built by the Germans. But at the end of the Second World War, as the war was winding down, the Britons, the Americans, the Russians were all racing into Germany to try and capture the rocket scientists that worked on this technology. 1,500 top scientists were captured by the Americans. But at the top of that list that they had, the blacklist, was this man, Wernher von Braun. So he was captured, actually surrendered to American forces in Austria, and he went on to build the Saturn V Apollo program for the Americans. Now, at the time of the launch of these rockets in the 1960s and 70s, each launch cost about $1.2 billion in today's terms. It cost about $6,000 per kilogram to get stuff into orbit. But over 50 years, we improved on that design. We took the V2 design, it became the Mercury rocket, then the Apollo rocket, and we improved on that gradually, getting the cost to orbit down by about 50% over the last 50 years. But along comes Elon Musk, and Elon Musk says, if we're going to get to Mars, we have to rethink rocket design. We have to bring the cost down by a magnitude, order of 10, to be able to afford to get humans to Mars. How do we do that? So he used a theory called first principles design. So first principles thinking is when you start from scratch. You say, if we were going to build a rocket today and we started from scratch, would we build it the same way Wernher von Braun built the V2 rocket and the Apollo rocket? And the answer was no. And SpaceX, the company he created, in just 14 years,
this is a
has
single
bought
engine
the,
landing.
sorry,
burn,
could
so
you
it's
drop
a
the volume,
slower,
please, guys? Has brought the cost to orbit down by 95%, down to about $300 per kilogram. That's the projected cost with the Falcon 9 Heavy. And these things can land themselves using artificial intelligence on ocean-going drones. Pretty incredible improvements. So you look at this, you say, oh, that's fine, rocket design. But can you guys think of another product that was revolutionary in its design, that was designed by a first principles design thinking approach? The iPhone, right? Now, what phone did you have before you had a smartphone? Did you have a Nokia banana phone? Or a Motorola StarTAC? No, you probably had a BBM, right? You probably had a BlackBerry. Because those were the phones that were hot, around 2005. Now, Steve Jobs didn't take a BlackBerry phone and iterate on it to get the iPhone. He didn't take the Nokia and iterate on it, or the Motorola. He started from scratch. He said, what would a device look like if it had an MP3 player, an internet browser, a phone capability, if we were to incorporate that into this new device? And the rumor is that he used to carry around a block of wood during the day about the size of what the iPhone would become. And he would play with this block of wood and imagine how this device might work. So this is first principles thinking. So this is where true disruption occurs, when you start from scratch and you say, if we were going to do things better, if we were going to do things differently, and we started from scratch, how would we do that? Now, in the financial service industry, we don't have first principles thinking. We have iterative thinking. So when the iPhone came along, instead of saying, wow, this represents a huge opportunity to think about payments in a different way, let's think about new ways of doing payments. Instead of that, what we did is we took the phone and we put a plastic card inside it, and we called it Apple Pay. So this is what we call design by analogy. We take the analogy of the credit card and we iterate on it. So this is a form of innovation, but this innovation happens much more slowly in terms of the changes. The big behavioral leaps, the big changes in society occur when we go back to first principles thinking. And if you think about banking today, and you look for examples of first principles design thinking in banking, guess what? You don't see that in America or Germany or the United Kingdom or Australia. But you do see it in Africa. You do see it in China. You do see it in India. You see it in emerging markets. That's the real opportunity. We're starting to bank billions of people that have never had a bank account before, and we're doing that through a mobile phone, and that's creating very different design thinking. Now, to illustrate the problem that incumbent banks have in this world, I wanted to use Jack Ma as an illustration. Now, Jack Ma, as you guys probably know, is the founder of Alibaba, Ant Financial, the financial company they have. But here he's talking at the World Economic Council about competing with Walmart. And he's talking about how Alibaba might be bigger than Walmart one day. Listen to what he said.
You do a great.
Let's try that again.
You do a great job, and blah, blah, blah. So I said, maybe in 10 years we'll be bigger than Walmart. He said, young man, you have a good hope. So we said, make a bet. I think in 10 years we'll be bigger than Walmart on the sales. Because if you want to have 10,000 new customers, you have to build a new warehouse and this, that. For me, 2 servers.
So good point, right? So if you're not sure what he said 2 servers, 2 computers. You want 10,000 new customers, you're Walmart, you need a warehouse, you need stores, you need staff. Alibaba, 2 servers, 2 computers. This is how first principles thinking thinks about designing a new business, designing a competitor to an existing business. How are we going to acquire 10,000 new customers? If you're a traditional bank, you say, well, we need branches. We need branches in this location and that location. We need people in those branches. We need brochures. We need signs. Alibaba, 2 servers. FinTech, 2 servers. A tech fin company like Alipay, 2 servers. So you can't compete by iterating on the branch model against a technology player like this. You're just never going to be able to be as efficient on a distribution and a cost perspective as these guys. Now, what this has produced is a really interesting innovation. This is the most successful savings product in the world today. It's called Yuebao. It's built by Alipay in China, and they've taken $185 billion in deposits over the last few years. This is a money market fund. The second biggest money market fund in the world is JP Morgan Chase's US Treasury Bond Fund. So this is much bigger. But this is just taking the average Chinese deposit takers that are working on Alibaba or Taobao platforms, doing e-commerce, and saying, hey, you've got money sitting in your digital wallet, why don't you put it in a savings facility? So Alipay didn't launch a savings product in the conventional sense. What they did is they put this inside behavior that was already there, the way money was moving around the economy, the way people were storing money, and they co-opted that behavior to create Yuebao. Now, when you think about this sort of behavioral shift, you can see other good examples of this on new platforms emerging, such as Uber. So Uber had a problem in the United States. They couldn't recruit drivers fast enough at the height of their growth. In cities like New York and Chicago and San Francisco, 30% of drivers had never had a bank account because they'd been working in the cash industry with yellow taxis and so forth. So they went to sign up for Uber, and they got to the debit card field, and they stopped. Uber was watching this, and they're asking the question, why are so many drivers stopping the sign-up process in the middle of the process? And they worked out these drivers didn't have a bank account. So they went to Wells Fargo and Bank of America and Chase, and they said, could you guys work with us to help us launch a bank account for our drivers? And they said, sure, just send them to the bank branch. We'll give them a bank account. And Uber's like, no, we don't want them to go to the branch. We want it to be much more efficient. And these big banks said, well, that's the way you get a bank account. So Uber found another partner, a company called Green Dot, a fintech company, and they said to Green Dot, what about if we could just do the bank account in the driver app? And Uber said, that's an excellent idea. In fact, you already collect their driver's license, their address, their social security number. You have all the information we need to create a bank account. So they just stuck a little tick box inside the Uber driver app that says, would you like an Uber debit card? And suddenly, over 3 months, they recruited tens of thousands of drivers, and they became the 3rd largest acquirer of bank accounts in the United States for small businesses. But Uber doesn't want to be a bank. All they were doing was putting banking inside the Uber sign-up process to make it more effective for Uber to grow their business. But the current banking system represented way too much friction for them. It was hurting their business, so they went around the restrictions of the banking system and embedded banking in the Uber driver sign-up process. So this is the big shift. Now in China, where you see the advancements of mobile payments with Alipay and Tencent WeChat, this innovation around using the phone to pay has produced a dramatic effect. In China, 92% of all mobile payments today are done by these 2 technology companies, Tencent WeChat and Alipay, Ant Financial. 92% of mobile payments. So I went to visit China Merchants Bank a little while ago, the number 5 bank in China. The chairman and the CEO were sitting in the boardroom, and I was talking about them competing, and the CEO waves his hand and he says, how do we compete against BAT? Do you know who BAT is? Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. That's all he was worried about. So I started talking about the way they could do new payment mechanisms, have new value systems in payments, and give someone a balance before they paid and after they paid and all that. And the CEO waved his hand again. He said, no. He said, the banks have lost payments in China to the technology companies. He said, I'm worried about how we stop them from taking credit too. This was amazing to me to see. But when you look at this is part of this challenge that banks have. When you see this first principles design thinking, that's where the big shift occurs. But we still can't get out of this iterative approach. This is Capital One, and this is their use of Amazon Alexa using voice. Now think about this. Instead of an entirely new approach to credit and thinking about how voice could create a new experience, this is how Capital One introduced Amazon Alexa into the United States with their credit card.
The Capital One skill for Amazon Alexa makes credit card payments easier than ever. After saying, Alexa, open Capital One, and speaking your personal key, you can pay your bill using only your voice.
When's my payment due?
The payment of your credit card is due July 9.
Pay my Capital One credit card bill.
You'll get the option to pay your statement balance or a minimum payment. Make your choice and confirm. A confirmation code will appear on the Capital One skill card in your Alexa app once the payment has been made.
Confirm.
All set. I've made the payment for you.
The Capital One skill makes account management as easy as speaking up. Just ask Alexa to find out for yourself.
So all Capital One did is they took their existing credit card system and tried to fit it for voice. This is how we've always done it with banking. Think about internet banking. When internet banking came along, banks didn't start with opening accounts and things like that. That's how Amazon started. Amazon started selling books online. That's how airlines started. Airlines started selling tickets online. Banks said, no, we can't sell anything online. You've got to come in the branch for that. Right? But then they started saying, well, we've got to use internet for something. What could we put on the internet for the banks? So I know someone said, we could put a bank statement on the internet. That'd be cool. You can log in and see your bank statement. So that was version 1 of banking on the internet. Now, when the mobile came along, instead of doing a first principles rethink of how we could use the mobile phone, what do? Let's see if we can take internet banking and put it on a smaller screen, okay? This is iterative thinking. So we see this as an example here. But what the mobile phone allows us to do is really iterate on, really design different credit experiences. So this is Max Levchin's company, Affirm. So what Affirm does is it allows you to access credit for a specific thing you're buying in a store in real time on your mobile phone. You don't need to apply for a credit card in advance. You don't need to go to the branch and sign a piece of paper. As you walk in the store, you just use this app and you can get access to credit. This is contextual design, putting the bank in your life when and where you need it. Now, when you think about the opportunity in Africa and elsewhere, there's 1.4 billion people that were unbanked that we brought into the banking system since 2000 as a result of the mobile phone. None of those people, most of them, haven't been into a bank branch. They don't have a plastic credit card. They now just have like a mobile money account or facility like this. So they're not going to expect to get a credit card on their phone. They're thinking about this in a different way. That's the real opportunity here, to design a banking system that works primarily through the phone for these unbanked. That's the big opportunity in Nigeria. It's certainly across the African continent. Now, Kenya, of course, I know it's a well-used example, M-Pesa, but 90% of the adult population has access to mobile money now. In Kenya, people trust M-Pesa more than they trust cash, right? This is a big thing. But there's already 13 countries in Africa where more people are using mobile money than traditional bank accounts today. But here's the opportunity. The opportunity is not to put more bank branches in place and get people to branches. In fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of physically getting to a branch is a big restriction to growth. So let's just use the mobile phone. So then the question is, how do you get people to trust payments, for example, on a mobile phone? In Kenya, it was a bit easier because Safaricom had 70% market share. But in countries like Nigeria, interoperability and acceptance is going to be absolutely key. Now in China, the effect of this mobile payments boom around the mobile technology has created a problem for banks. Deposits are at 40% greater risk today than they were 10 years ago. Not because of competing banks, but because more and more money is going into the mobile payments ecosystem. Now, today you need a bank account to cash in on Alipay or these systems in China. But all that money stays in that mobile payment ecosystem. It doesn't go back out to the banks. So there's a question here. Borrowing from the Back to the Future movie, where we're going, do we really need bank accounts in the future? Well, let me focus on payments as an area, for example. This is this is WeChat in China, and it's in 77 countries already. Thailand, it's very big. These guys are starting to incorporate interoperability with other networks as well. Alipay has partnered with Kakao in Korea, with Paytm in India, with Globe in Philippines and so forth. And now you can just use your phone to pay. You don't need a traditional point of sale system. You don't need a plastic card. This is the creation of a payment experience. It's not a payment product. It's not a physical artifact that you get from a bank branch by signing a piece of paper. It's a virtual value store on your mobile phone that only needs your phone to work. This is how we have to think about banking in the future. Banking as an experience, not as a product. This is the real shift of Bank 4.0. Now, I'll give you one example that we created in New York on Moven, my startup, which is a neobank, we call it, or a challenger bank in the United States. So we created this savings capability on a smartwatch. Let's say you're spending $200 US below your typical spend. You'll get a message on your smartwatch that'll say, hey, that's really good. You've cut your spending by $200 or maybe $50. Then we say, how much of that would you like to save today? Would you like to save $10, $25, or $50 today? It gives you that prompt using either a chatbot in the app or in the interface on the smartwatch. And over 60% of our customers responded to that by putting money in their savings stash, as we call it with Moven. But Moven doesn't offer any interest rate for our savings facility as yet because of the restrictions we have in the United States. And we did no marketing or advertising. All we did is enable savings behavior. That's why this product, or experience rather, was successful. It's not a product, it's a savings experience. This is how we have to think about money and banking in the 21st century. Money experiences embedded in your life. So you walk into a grocery store and you don't have enough money to get your groceries, you'll get a message on your smartphone solving that problem for you. It won't tell you to go to a bank, fill out a piece of paper, and wait for a credit card. It'll solve that problem when and where you need it. And in the future, with smart glasses in our head-up display, when we walk into a car dealership, our smart glasses will be able to tell us what car we can afford, how much we can afford. This is going to be banking that we can experience every day to solve life's problems. This is where we're moving to. You won't need to go to the bank for any of this. It'll be just embedded in your life when and where you need it. This is the key shift. So the real question comes, are humans better? Because this is the bank proposition. You want to see a human for your banking. But artificial intelligence is going to attack that as well. So in the future, the advice you get won't be advice on which mortgage product is best for you or which investment you should invest in. It'll be simple advice, like you pull out your phone and you say, hey Siri, can I afford to go out for dinner tonight? And Siri will say, not after the weekend you and John had last weekend at the footy in London. But this is the sort of advice we'll expect from our banking system in the future. Now, artificial intelligence is making huge leaps right now in advice. So we see AIs better at diagnosing cancer than human doctors, such as IBM Watson. We see AI being able to translate languages better than humans, such as Google's machine learning algorithm that does language translation. It has even come up with its own language to do this that human engineers don't understand. And of course, we have self-driving cars in the future. Now, this self-driving car you're about to see is an Audi RS7 race car. Now, they've built 2 of these vehicles to test self-driving capabilities. What's really interesting, though, these 2 vehicles, one is called Test Vehicle A and the other is Test Vehicle B. Well, they nicknamed them AJ and Bobby. Bobby drives faster and more aggressively than AJ, but has the same hardware, the same vehicle, the same software, the same programming. So I asked the Audi engineers, why is it that one car drives faster than the other? And the Audi engineers said, yes, we're not really sure. But we think, because it's a machine learning capability, we think at some point in the past, one of the engineers was driving more aggressively, and that set the tone for the way Bobby learned to drive. Now, Bobby isn't less safe. He just drives faster than his cousin, who's the same. So artificial intelligence is going to show some personality. And we start to see technologies like identity technologies now. We have facial recognition that's being used by Apple and Samsung and others. And today, when you go to many countries around the world, they've replaced guys sitting behind the desk for the passport with artificial intelligence, with an algorithm that can do facial recognition or fingerprint recognition. I came through passport control at Nigeria at Lagos Airport last night. That was fun. But you know, you have these guys sitting behind the desk and they're looking at the photo. Can you take your glasses off, please? You know. But this technology is already 15 to 20 times better than a human at doing facial recognition. So you have to ask the question, why do we still open bank accounts using a human eye to verify a customer when we've got technology that's better? So when you think about AI, the self-driving car is a good analogy for advice. This is what a self-driving car sees as it's driving. It has these LiDAR detectors, cameras. It can see 1,000 times more information than your human eye can see. And it can process that in 70% of the time that it takes your human brain to respond. So statistically speaking, no human will be as safe as an autonomous vehicle once this technology is mature, because it can process more information to make a decision. And that's where AI is going to beat humans on advice. The ability to process information and make a decision or give advice based on that information is where AI is going to outperform humans. That's a challenge we face. We're not going to have things like anti-money laundering processes. When we think about banking, this is going to be replaced with artificial intelligence, just tracking money flows. And so this all comes back to the fact that banks will need to become data companies. Processing data is going to be the big differential. Same as a payment company, anyone working in this space, you're only going to be as good as your data. So let me finish off with one illustration about this shift using another Amazon Alexa example. And this is Alec Baldwin this time, demonstrating Amazon Alexa technology to do a simple transaction. And I want you to watch what he buys using his voice.
Yeah.
You're okay. He's okay. He made it.
Jason, what do you mean?
We were very bad boys.
Alexa, what's in the news?
Here's the news.
Alec Baldwin and Jason Schwartzman were seen mooning paparazzi. Baldwin grew a shoe at photographers before making a run for it.
My poor cashmere socks. Alexa, reorder another pair of Brescianis.
Reordering Bresciani socks.
Okay, listen. Can you send some lawyers or something?
Alec.
So this is what you can do with Amazon Echo, Amazon Alexa today. You can reorder a pair of socks. Right? Actually, you can order a ton of stuff. Anything you can buy on Amazon that you've ordered before, you can reorder using this technology. Pretty cool tech. But if you think about product design from a bank, which credit card did he use to buy his socks? Do we know? Was it Citibank? Was it HSBC? We don't know because he had it set up with Amazon Alexa. But today, when we think about promotion of a product like a credit card, we say, well, maybe we'll promote it with cashback or airline miles. So let me imagine this scenario with Alec Baldwin with his airline miles, okay? Oh, my poor cashmere socks. Alexa, reorder me a pair of Bresciani socks. But wait, there's a special on airline miles this month with Bank of America. Let me give you a different credit card number. Do you think that's the way it's going to work? It's not. So we have to start redesigning the products in banking to fit this sort of automated world. The value that we had, the way we marketed these products in the past, isn't going to work. And paper is the biggest killer for automation. If you still require a signature on a piece of paper in the future, your business is dead as a bank because you can't compete in this world based on real-time integration of banking into people's lives. So just to sort of wrap this up, we know bank tellers are going to be impacted by automation, but I want to illustrate it one further way. This is Hatsune Miku. She is a Japanese pop star. You may have heard of her. She's a little different from your average pop star, you see. She's a computer algorithm. So this is actually what we call a Vocaloid or an avatar, and she's performing here in front of thousands and thousands of kids around the world. Over 5 million kids have seen her perform at concerts. Now, these kids who are rocking out to Hatsune Miku, they don't think of her as a computer program. They just think of her as a music star, a pop star. So I want you to think about that. The kids, our kids who are growing up with a smartphone, they can take their selfies, they're using WhatsApp and WeChat to communicate. They're doing all this stuff, they're on social media. Do you really think these kids that will go and see an avatar perform at a pop concert would prefer to see a human in a bank branch? This is highly unlikely, right? So really, if you're a bank today, you really have only three choices. You can partner with a technology company or a fintech, you can acquire that technology, or you can try and copy it. The fastest and most efficient method is to partner. So this is why we encourage fintechs and banks to work together. This is the real opportunity. Because every major industry will be led by a technology company over the next 10 years. You saw the graph beforehand showing the top performers on the S&P and NASDAQ. They're all technology companies today. Every leading company for each industry, whether it's health, whether it's automotive, will all be led by a technology-first company. This is the key. And blockchain is going to be the foundation of these architectures, not just for banking, but for things like identity and other things. So when you look here in Africa, you see great examples of the use of blockchain, such as the deployment of solar cells throughout African villages on the blockchain. You can buy a solar cell using Bitcoin, and for every kilowatt of energy that's produced, a new cryptocurrency is produced called a solar coin. And that can be used to purchase more solar cells and so forth. This is a great example of blockchain use in the African continent. But let me give you one final example. So think about an autonomous vehicle in somewhere like London or New York in the future, driving around, picking you up and taking you to your office in the morning. Maybe it has to pay for the road tolls and the road tax. It charges itself up later, gets some electricity, it has to pay for the electricity. But then it can log on to Uber as an autonomous vehicle and drive for a few hours, says, hey Uber, I'm an autonomous vehicle. Do you need a driving, autonomous car? And Uber logs it on for 3 or 4 hours, it drives, and it gets paid for driving for Uber. So it needs to have a wallet or some mobile wallet inside that vehicle to do all of these transactions. But how do you get that self-driving car down the bank branch to sign a signature card? You can't. So when we start having devices doing their own payments on the blockchain, this is when everything changes. This is when first principles thinking needs to come to the fore. So by 2025, the biggest financial institution in the world won't be a bank. It's probably going to be Ant Financial. By the end of next decade, we expect they'll have 3 billion customers, and they'll be in over 100 countries. They just bought MoneyGram in the United States for $1 billion to get access to the US market. By the middle of next decade, they'll be worth about $500 billion, twice what ICBC, the biggest bank in the world, is worth today. That's the power of disruptive thinking. That's the power of first principles design in financial services. If you really want to disrupt, you don't take the existing model and iterate on it. You start from scratch. And when you start from scratch in banking, and you say, if we're going to start from scratch today and create an entirely new way of doing banking, would you still put buildings on the corner of the high street that require you to go and sign a piece of paper to get a plastic card or a book from the bank? Not with a mobile phone in your pocket. That's not the way we would design banking today. So thank you very much for your attention today and listening to my thoughts on Augmented and Bank 4.0. Thank you.